Everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Coco Nomad Podcast with your host, the Coco Nomad. And today's topic is making or creating small things. We are so conditioned a lot of times today to think big. We want to do these big things, we want to accomplish these large goals. And I think we often overlook the value in creating small things. And I wanted to take a moment today and sort of delve into that and let's get into this process. And I want to share how I'm using it right now. Sort of not really a revelation, but it's kind of revisiting this idea. For instance, I talked about this in an earlier episode called Eating the Frog versus Quick Wins, but it was really more focused on starting your day, getting small things done sort of to serve as a momentum versus sort of trying to tackle that big task, and talk about the pros and cons of each approach and how you can use them as you need depending on your mood, depending on what it is going on. So definitely recommend checking that episode out. I'll link it in the show notes. But today I wanted to talk more specifically about making smaller things and sort of how we can take this common process and apply it. Now, as a software developer, typically the way that we encounter this is as we're writing things or as we're making code, we basically will either take a big function or big idea, big feature, and try to start breaking that down. I like to do this when we are going in through the sort of the storyboarding phase, and we're grooming the story. We take something that we'd like to accomplish, and I want to break that down into smaller deliverable pieces so that I can be sure that it's something that we can do, and you start to investigate. And let's kind of get into some of these advantages of breaking these things down. But I also want to take that idea and reverse it as well, and let's take a look at it in the other direction, which is, how about we just start out making small things? It's like, so let's just take this approach. We can see, again, sort of like eating the frog and getting the quick wins. We can look at the work that we do and how we approach it from two different ends of the spectrum and walk our way each way to use what's most effective when it's most effective for us. So there's like no one right way, but we look at this practice and see what we can get out of it. So the first one is just reiterating the main benefit that I just talked about and reference, which is the quick win. Doing the smaller things or creating smaller things is a great way to build momentum or maintain momentum. It's very easy to get stuck somewhere in the course of your work during the day and get derailed and feel defeated. But if you have smaller things to accomplish, you'll get that hit of adrenaline and just sort of positive feedback when you're knocking out the smaller things. It's almost like having a shopping list and you're walking and working your way through the grocery store and you're just picking up the items and you're just ticking these things off. Now, granted, there might be some challenge in one of those items, but once you start to build that momentum and you have these smaller things, a lot of times, as long as they're not dependent on another thing, you can even loop back around and say, okay, I'll table the difficult thing until a bit later, and I'll just keep knocking out these small wins and I'll circle back. The other thing that I like about the smaller things and creating smaller things or breaking these things down into smaller pieces is that it gives you a tangible stopping point. So a lot of times I'm working on an app feature and it'll be something big like, using voice to record someone's daily goals and whatnot. But there's a lot wrapped up into creating a view that does that, syncing up with the libraries that's going to actually modify and record a user's voice, breaking that down and handling all the errors that could possibly happen, and then doing the UI and everything. So it's like, for me, if I break that down into smaller pieces and I create small things, then what I'm able to do then is if I get to a certain point, I'm like, okay, I've created this particular piece of the UI. I've gotten this piece of feedback. I'm at least recording and it started or something like that. So any sub-segment, and I can stop for the day. So I can save the work that I'm doing and I commit it and I'm like, okay, I'm done. And then I have a jumping off point the next day. Now, just as an aside, sometimes I do this incredibly crazy thing where I'll just like leave something broken so I know exactly where I should pick up the next day. I don't think that's necessarily a great practice. It's just full disclosure, I'm not always doing the best things, but it's like, okay, I'm going to go to bed angry and I'm going to wake up, remember why I was angry. It's like breaking things down into smaller pieces, though, that you can complete gives you better stopping points. The other thing about creating the small things that's not necessarily just in the area of breaking big tasks down, but even starting small, is that when you're doing a small thing and it's really bound and constricted, you can really stay in the moment. If I'm just doing a screen layout and that's all that task is, then I can stay in the moment and just think about the screen layout without thinking about how it's going to interact with other portions of the application, or how this particular piece of writing is going to interact with an overall agenda that I may have for like creating a book, or anything like that, or this podcast. It's like, this is one thing. I create a small thing. This is an episode, and I try to keep them under 15 minutes because it's a small thing that I want to create, and it gives me those other two advantages I mentioned. I have a tangible stopping point. I maintain momentum on a week-to-week basis, but I stay in the moment. Today I'm talking about creating small things. Yes, it fits into a larger picture of how we do work, but I'm not going to let that stop me. And another thing that I can do is that as I'm focused and staying in the moment, I can also discover additional uses as I'm doing that. Because I'm staying right here, I can think about some other ways that the work that I'm doing is affected. I can change some criteria in my mind, not in the work that I'm doing. But I start to think about it. If I have a small piece I can just extract, there might be other ways I can use it. I do this a lot, of course, with code, because I'll have like a component. So for instance, like I have this custom weight picker. So it's like you can pick your weight or height. It's like a little scrolling roll bar. Now I can use that in a couple of different places. I can change it from being weight and height. Maybe I can change it to be like your budget for the month. I can change it to be something else. But because I created this small thing, I'm very clear, and it's a lot clearer about how I can repurpose it. So because it's not trying to do too much, because it's got a simple goal. It's like, oh, okay, I can repurpose this. It's like a screw. I can use it here. I can screw it in wood. Maybe I can screw in some plywood. I can screw in some drywall. It's got all these other uses or applicable uses. So, and then the last one is that when I think about the small things as you're going through this process, a lot of times, particularly if you're breaking things down or taking things away to make it simpler, you can create some valuable byproducts and remnants. And as much as I'd like to come up with like a technical or work related one, the biggest one I think about is like meat that goes across, like you have these cows, right? And I was listening to this story about how a cow will cross the U.S.-Mexican border multiple times. And I'm only saying this because of tacos, of course. Yes, it's because of tacos. So you grow the cow, or you have the cows as a baby, you bring it across, you grow it in Mexico, they feed it, and then they're getting ready to like, okay, we're going to process this, and we're going to sell this meat back across in the U.S. So they send the cow back over to do the processing in the U.S., but Americans don't eat all of the pieces of the cow because, we're fancy and we're too good for a lot of this stuff. So they take the remnants and they send it right back over the border to make its way into Campeche and some other types of tacos or other kind of meats it uses. And you can think about any kind of product. If you're a vegetarian or vegan, I'm sorry. But yeah, that was the first example that came to my mind, because I do eat tacos like very, very frequently, and they're usually beef or pork. And so this happens quite a bit. But this idea is that there even in the small things, as you're dissecting or breaking a big thing down, there might be some smaller byproducts or remnants that you didn't even think about using that you can see value in because you were too focused on the big picture initially. So I wanted to just think about and talk about those things and give you like these examples. And I have a couple of non-meat examples. So for instance, talk about components in application. One other one that I use is a bar chart. I have a simple bar chart that I use in a couple of apps. So like I have a bar chart that tracks Ngobo for the spending. I have a bar chart that goes into Puffin for like the allocation of hours across projects. And you can do the same thing. But even outside of software development, another place that you can do this is in terms of like, maybe you have a desire to create this book. This book is your big goal. Well, what about blogging? Blogging is one of the ways that you can sort of construct the components, but I'd go even further, and this is a big one for me this year, is microblogging. I always thought, well, I've got to have like between 16 and 1,500 words to even make this worthy of a post, and the reality is you don't. A lot of the valuable content in books, quite frankly, is just like a nugget. It's like this little nugget, and it might be just a sentence or a phrase, and I've decided to start blogging, microblogging that this year, instead of waiting until I had a bigger quote unquote topic to blog about, because there's a value in creating that small thing. Now, this is an example of not necessarily starting from a big thing and breaking it down, but seeing value in a small thing as the idea came to me and saying, oh, this is a valuable thing I'd like to talk about. I'll figure out where it fits in a larger context later, but the small thing has value in and of itself. So I'm creating that small thing. Another way I'm doing that is in micro tutorials. Like, yes, this year my goal is to make a couple of online courses in developing mobile apps and doing some other things. But again, there's a lot of value in small little tips and tricks that people can use to get them through their day. And so that was one of the reasons why I started the YouTube channel, and it's up, and the link will be in the show notes. The channel is the Coco Nomad, just like the podcast name, and Twitter and Instagram. So I'm trying to be consistent across the platforms. But I started by just doing little simple things. Like, I've recorded the first 2 videos are just little workarounds to some glitchy issues I'm having while I was developing. So the videos are between 2 and 4 minutes. They're nothing long. And over the course of the year, I'm just going to keep creating these things, small little things to create value, to help someone along the way. Eventually, some or most, or maybe all, I don't know yet, will make their way into one or more courses, because some of these things can be reused. Getting around a particular bug, or creating a smaller component, or understanding a simple concept. These things can go into multiple courses and be reused, but I didn't want the big thing to stop me from moving forward. And that's what I want to leave you with today. Think about the small things and the value that they have, irrespective of where they fit into a larger picture, or irrespective of their size. Judge them not by their size, and just say, this has value. I'm going to release this in whatever form you want, whether it's writing, whether it's video content, whether it's something, a small widget in an application, or a gist that you can put on GitHub. Any of these things have value, and just keep creating those things and use them to gain momentum, to stay in the moment. Reuse them as you need, and then know definitively that, hey, I've completed this thing, I'm done. I don't have to really overthink this and worry about it and let it hang over me that it's not complete, because it's a small thing. So as always, hope it was helpful. If you get any value out of this, please share and rate the podcast on your preferred channel, whether it's Apple Podcast or Spotify or Stitcher or wherever. If you have any suggestions or questions or any feedback at all, please hit me up at the Coco Nomad on Instagram and Twitter. Thank you for listening, and I will talk to you next time.